We are going to talk a little bit more today about how we approach literature versus informational text, nonfiction. Nonfiction is usually going to be based on truth, facts, real life. It's not made up, right? And so fiction is usually about there's some type of story that's going on. And so the way in which we read them is different. Okay, so for instance, we've spoken so far in class about nonfiction. When we read nonfiction, we're going to remember the acronym WTP. What's the point? As I read and I go along, I'm going to be thinking, what's the point? What's the point? And that's a good best practice for anything that you're reading. However, when you're reading a really good story, especially if it's a good story, you might not really stop to annotate with everything. You might be reading a difficult story and you might need to annotate more. But there are certain things you want to focus on. And those things that you want to focus on with nonfiction are camp. Remember camp for nonfiction, which is conflict, action, motifs, and people or the characters, right? Because the story are usually about characters. And then motifs are ideas that repeat, okay? An idea that repeats, an event that repeats. It's not a word that repeats. It's not a thing that repeats. It's usually an idea or an event that will repeat. The conflict and the action are kind of connected. So when I'm reading a story, I'm looking at where's the conflict, where's the action, is there anything that's repeating, and is there anything significant about the characters? Because where those come together is where your theme is going to lie. So for instance, if I have, I'll do like a little diagram here, and I have some motifs and ideas that repeat. And then right here, I have some things about the characters. And over here, I have some central conflict or action, okay? Where these intersect is usually going to be where my theme is. So for instance, if my motifs were love and family, okay? That's my motif. Those are my motifs. And let's say the conflict is having to lose someone. Having to lose someone. Yeah, we'll go with that. I can't. My handwriting's awful. And the characters are a boy and his grandmother. And it keeps talking about their love and their family. And it talks about this young boy and this grandmother and how they might act. And the boy might be taking things for granted. And the girl and the grandmother might be lonely, right? And so if those are my main things that really I keep seeing, I can probably put those together and determine a theme. And a theme is a lesson, right? A theme is a lesson, not one word. A lot of times people will go, oh, it's about love. Okay, well, love is a motif. That doesn't tell me anything. What is the lesson? So for instance, the lesson might be don't take loved ones for granted. Okay. All right, so I want to show you an example, and we're going to use this story. We're going to be reading this in its entirety later, but I want to kind of get you started with the process of how you're going to annotate. And so we'll kind of go through this. $1.87, that was all. She had put it aside, and 1 cent, and then another, and then another, and in her careful buying of meat and other food, Della counted it 3 times. $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. Okay, planning on Christmas. There was nothing to do but fall on the bed and cry, so Della did it. So I might go, there was nothing to do but fall on the bed and cry. Is she sad? This could be internal conflict, right? There's different types of conflict. That could be some internal conflict going on. Is she upset? I'm going to keep reading. While the lady of the house is slowly growing quieter, we can look at the home. Furnished rooms at a cost of $8 a week. There's little more to say about it. In the hall below was a letter box, too small to hold a letter. There was an electric bill, but it could not make a sound. Also, there was a name beside the door, Mr. James Dillingham Young. When the name was placed there, Mr. James Dillingham Young was paid $30 a week. Now he was only paid $20 a week. The name seemed too long and important. It should perhaps have been Mr. James D. Young. But when Mr. James Dillingham Young entered the furnished rooms, his name became very short. Mrs. James Dillingham Young put her arms warmly about him and called him Jim. You have already met her. She is Della. Okay, so I'm going to make a note. I have Della and I have Jim. And apparently they love each other. That's really the only action I got going on here, right? Della finished her crying and cleaned the marks of it from her face. She stood by the window and looked out with no interest. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she only had $1.87 with which to buy Jim a gift. She put aside as much as she could do for months for this result. $20 a week is not much. Everything had cost more than she expected. It always happened like that. So definitely there is some conflict right here, right? We know there's some internal conflict. She doesn't have money for Christmas. I think we can all relate to how frustrating that can be at times, right? So she does not have money for Christmas. She is sad. And then sometimes when I'm annotating, I'll even write do little pictures. See, there was a looking glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen the kind of looking glass that is placed in $8 furnished rooms. It was very narrow. $8 furnished rooms. So this must have been an old story, right? It has to be an old story, especially only getting paid $20 a week. However, if he was very thin and moved quickly, he might be able to get a good view of himself. Della, being quite thin, had mastered this art. Suddenly, she turned from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face had lost its color. Quickly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its complete length. So she has really beautiful hair, right? Really beautiful hair. Or it's long hair, that's for sure.